Thinking about helping other leaders, one of the things I discovered early on in church life is to get the momentum going towards seeing a church reach people for Jesus was much harder than I thought it was going to be. I thought Christians naturally want to tell people about Jesus. I discovered, no, they don't. And seeing people won for Christ I had to put that up to the top of the agenda again. Didn't realise it had slipped down. And then once we started thinking about trying to win people for Jesus, I was getting a whole load of Christians subtly complain towards me saying, Ray, why are you spending all this time with outsiders? Is that something you found too?
To me, one of the great issues is the whole issue of confidence in the gospel.
Yeah.
And I think in every situation that I've been operating in, I just find people don't have a natural confidence in the gospel. Yeah. And I felt that one of my main roles is to constantly nurture that confidence. Because if people have confidence in the gospel, they'll talk naturally to their family, their friends, and others around them. But getting confidence in the gospel in these days is incredibly hard work. I just have to, personally, I have to keep telling my leaders, the gospel will succeed. We look out on the news, we see the difficulties, problems. Doesn't matter. The gospel has faced that in the past, and it will face it in the future. And then to constantly as well, in your preaching, every time you're with people in your congregation, to lift up their eyes and to say, the gospel's not struggling. It may be difficult, but the gospel is able to overcome this. So I find the whole issue, confidence, inspiring confidence in the gospel and its ultimate success is one of the main challenges that I've found with my own ministry. I don't know if you found that, Paul, and what your situation is.
I think people follow what you do as a leader. And I think actually an absolute critical aspect is, are you trying to connect with your neighbours and your friends? Are you inviting people to events? And I think that's what you've done this at Grace Church Rees. You've been really good with Jenny in just getting involved with sports clubs and actually using those things. And I think people will see that that's what the leader is about, and that will shape the church. But I think too, how you talk about connecting the gospel with our neighbours and friends in the community is very significant. And preaching in such a way that you recognise that people are not across the line yet. They may be exploring, and that church becomes a safe place where friends could invite their non-Christian friends and family and not feel that they're being got at, that this is a safe place and that they're welcome to be there. It's all these cultural things that will begin to shape the tone of whether people risk bringing people along to events. And I think doing consistently good guest events so that people have confidence. So year by year, you put on a great Christmas candlelit carol service. This is what I've seen at Charlotte, is year by year, more and more people are inviting folk because they know, the last few years have been great. I do want to bring somebody. And so you got to putting on events where people are kicking themselves that they haven't brought somebody because they think, I wish I'd brought that person because it was so good. And it's just actually doing that year by year and building momentum, isn't it?
I find it's very interesting you say it. I know when we started off working it to build momentum, I realised the problem was inside the heads of the Christians. They were saying, my friends will say no, so I won't ask them. And I was saying, we had to teach, don't say their no's for them. And surprise, surprise, when people did start inviting people personally to things and their friends, some said politely no, but others surprisingly said, okay, I'll come. And then they came to something. Then the second thing we had to do was work very hard, what Tim Keller calls the as-if principle. Speak as if the place is full of people here for the first time. And we do that now every week. And some of our own folks say, why do you keep telling us that you're Ray Evans and you're leading the meeting? We all know that. No, not everybody knows that. And working at that principle of creating an as-if, the Christians begin to realise it is safe to bring people here. It's not cringy. They'll be welcomed. They'll be treated properly. And you then begin to build momentum day, year on year on year. People realise, I don't want to miss this. I don't want my friends to miss this. I think for us, that probably was at least a 10-year journey to get people to realise that the guest events, the Sundays, are environments where we can bring people in, and it'll be great. But Michael, any other insights on that, building momentum?
The big challenge is for all of us to learn to live in the big picture, if I put it that, to step back from our situation.
Yeah.
I think you mentioned how often when you start to encourage people to go down this road, the automatic response is the difficulties. And people will say, well, this is difficult. I'm finding it a struggle to share the gospel. Or sometimes people just really don't like there being crowds.
Yeah.
And so they complain, well, I liked it when it was smaller.
Yeah.
And in my own situation, what I found is I have to constantly draw them back and say, difficulties are all right. Problems are all right. In fact, it's part of the reality of the gospel.
Yeah.
We live in a world that's fallen, so we shouldn't be surprised that there are difficulties. And equally, part of the Christian life and ministry will involve difficulties. So I've said to my people at times, if this is all the Lord asks of us, aren't we so privileged to be able to give that in our service?
Yeah.
Whereas we know of others in other lands that have to give, far more difficulty.
Yeah.
But I think part of the skill of a leader, it seems to me, is to turn the situation to be positive rather than negative.
Yes.
Because it's I just find this constant drift of everybody to say it's falling apart,
Yes.
This is too difficult, we shouldn't do it. Whereas I want to turn it around and say, praise God. We're going forward, we're facing a few difficulties. Well, if that's all we have to do, no problem at all.
No.
So that's what I've found is a very important aspect.
Paul, you and I were talking about this research done on how many non-Christians know a Christian and how they think about Christians in our community. Do you want to share a little bit about that? Because
it was an EA study, wasn't it? Talk Jesus.
Yeah.
Something like that. And they found that in the UK, 67% of the population know a real Christian.
Yeah.
Which is a huge number.
Yeah.
And the astonishing thing they also investigated was, of those who knew a Christian, how many thought that their Christian friends were homophobic? Well, it was only 4%. So the great majority of people actually have Christian friends and think positively of them.
Yeah.
So in our heads, we're thinking, they're against us. They think we're wacko. Well, actually, that's not the case.
No.
Yeah. How many of those are maybe hungry to learn something about Jesus? About 20%. So wasn't that right?
Yeah. 20%, 1 in 5.
And so, so 4 out of 5, you might get knocked back. But you need to encourage people, don't give up, because actually 20% of the population is 6-7 million people who actually would be open to a conversation about Jesus.
It's
so
astonishing.
Don't give up just because one neighbour's refused to engage. A few doors down, someone really wants to hear.
Yes.
And it's just being on the front foot. You're saying being positive. Actually, that the Lord is saving people through the gospel. That's why we're here. That's why Jesus hasn't come back yet.
Yes.
So and the gospel's still saving people.
Yeah.
And I think baptisms are so exciting because I get people to share their story in such a way, show people how you got here.
Yes.
And it just encourages the church. Actually, what we're doing here is leading people to Christ.
Yeah.
And it builds confidence in the gospel.